Hi there. Welcome this week to a slightly left field review as I look at the Ambient TinyMike, which bears a weird resemblance to one of those little candle lighters. I'm David, and as always, I am testing today's microphone in the same way. I set my peaks to be between -6 and -12. I measure the noise floor, which you'll see in a minute, and I read out 20 sentences that are between 1 and 9 words, testing character voices, sibilants, plosives, proximity, etc. I balance the levels between the microphones, as I always use a benchmark mic as well, but normalise that audio just for audibility, and beyond that there is absolutely no editing, no second takes, just the adjustments to balance noise. This week, as I said, I am looking at the Ambient TinyMike, and the benchmark microphone I'm using is the Deity S-Mic 3S, which is a fantastic microphone that, by complete coincidence, I do not own anymore, as of about 2 weeks ago. Let's have a look at the frequency response curve for the Deity 3S. Now, as you'll see, it's got a pretty flat curve in the grand scheme of flatness, but it's weirdly wobbly. Not what I'd expect, even from a short shotgun. That said, it might be more stable, and it might be less stable than the TinyMike response, and that's a bit of a problem with the TinyMike. I'm going to come back to that. The great thing about the Deity 3S is it is the size of a small diaphragm condenser microphone. It competes against shotguns that are usually a lot longer, and it is the weight of a portable USB microphone. It is just 148 millimeters long and a somewhat ridiculous 44 grams in weight. In terms of self-noise, the A-weighted self-noise is 12 dBA, and the CCIR self-noise, which is important this week, is 24 dB. It's normal for CCIR self-noise to be 10 to 12 decibels above the A-weighted self-noise. As such, I got a noise floor in recording of -64 decibels. My experiences with the microphone are actually fairly extensive. I used it as my travel microphone, so whenever I went anywhere, it came with me until I replaced it with the Sanken CSM1, which is even shorter, sounds better, and is, unfortunately, far, far, far more expensive. In terms of price, you can get the Deity S-Mic 3S from Wix Music in the UK for £299, and at the moment you can't seem to get it from Amazon US, but normally it is $349 from Amazon US, although it has spent a lot of the time being mislisted. It has historically said it is just the S-Mic 3, not the 3S, but it has actually been the 3S. So today's microphone that I'm looking at is the Ambient TinyMike, which is an odd one because, frankly, it's an on-camera microphone. It's not the kind of microphone I normally look at, but it is still technically a shotgun microphone and allegedly, according to them, the smallest shotgun microphone available, and that's why I was interested. So let's have a look at the frequency response. I say that with my tongue in my cheek because there is no frequency response. They don't publish it. And to say that I see the lack of a frequency response being published as a warning sign is a wild understatement. Now, it's a bit of a funny one. It is shorter than the Deity S-Mic 3S by 8 millimeters. It's 140 millimeters long, 14 centimeters, and it is lighter. It's 30 grams, but that is without an XLR connector. And obviously adding on the XLR, as I had to for when I did my tests, makes it, kind of longer and heavier than the Deity S-Mic 3S. It is lighter than what's, I think, its main competitor, which is the Rode VideoMic Go. These are not the microphones I normally kind of play around with. Honestly, probably a terrible choice for a comparison video. Certainly a terrible choice for one of my videos. Who would use it for voiceover? I don't know anyone. I literally rented the microphone for the hell of it with a bunch of other microphones that I actually more seriously wanted to review, purely to see how it stacked up against the 3S. I did this for fun. Not only do they not publish a frequency response? At least not one that I can find. They don't publish the self-noise in dBA. They only publish it in CCIR. It is 33 decibels CCIR, which, typically probably means anywhere between 11 and 15 or even 9 and 15 dBA. It's hard to say. It is certainly noisier. I get a noise floor of minus 58. And that is not hugely reducible with a low cut, which is reflective of a high CCIR. It's a sign that there is noise up in the higher frequencies, not just the lower ones. In terms of price, it is £375 in the UK from Pink Noise and $560 in the US from BH Photo and Video. Neither of those are affiliate links, unlike the links to the Deity 3S. But frankly, if you are using it with an XLR connector, then it is longer and heavier than the Deity S-Mic 3S and significantly more expensive. So, it's going to have to sound really good for it to be competitive. As I said at the top of the video, I always test with the same 20 sentences, so let's have a listen to those.
Cue dramatic music. Cue dramatic music. Or don't. We're not your mom. Or don't. We're not your mom. Crunchazoids. Crunchazoids. Now, imagine the perfect espresso. Now, imagine the perfect espresso. Precision is not an option. Precision is not an option. Talk to someone who gets it. Talk to someone who gets it.
I don't think we should go in there. I don't think we should go in there.
I brought you a spoon. I brought you a spoon. Oh, it's a lovely day to be a me. Oh, it's a lovely day to be a me. I'm the best magical dog. I'm the best magical dog. All are safe under my protection. All are safe under my protection. Roll up, roll up, roll up, roll up. You just got mud on my shoes. You just got mud on my shoes. I was never in the shadows. I was never in the shadows. Client said it'd be easy. Client said it'd be easy.
I'm going to count down from 3 and then... I'm going to count down from 3 and then...
Kill them all. Kill them all. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. They're right behind you. They're right behind you.
All right. So the other thing I like to do in my tests is compare how I can get the audio to sound in an audiobook once it has been processed with a fairly standardized FX chain that really only differs in terms of EQ. And for that, I always use the first paragraph of Winnie the Pooh. So let's have a listen.
Here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs, but sometimes he feels that there really is another way if only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Winnie the Pooh. Here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs, but sometimes he feels that there really is another way if only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Winnie the Pooh.
So, looking at my YouTube analytics, as far as I can tell, most people tend to watch the start of this video and then skip straight to my conclusions. So, for those of you who have watched through, thank you. For those who've jumped straight to the conclusions, wasn't it amazing when the dinosaur walked past? No, seriously, I've got conclusions. I've got quite a lot of thoughts, a damn sight more thoughts about the Ambient TinyMike than I expected to. So what did I like? It has less of a dip at the top end than the 3S. I can't tell that from the frequency response chart. There is not one, but basically from what I hear, meaning it tends to feel slightly more present. It's also one of the things I don't like because it still has a dip, I think, compared to a much flatter microphone, but it is not as much as the 3S, and that is therefore a significant, improvement over the 3S. To my ears, it sounds a damn sight flatter in response than the 3S. Surprisingly so, to be honest. Although, to be fair, the frequency response for the 3S is a bit insane. So it's not amazingly hard to be flatter. I think it's fractionally warmer sounding, but honestly, that might be my imagination. And one of the kind of rather useful things about it is even with no windshield or pop filter on, it seemed extraordinarily resistant to plosives. I guess that makes sense to me because the end's like, what is it, 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters? It's somewhere between 3 and 5 millimeters wide, I think, the tip. It's quite hard to plosive something that small. You've got to hit it with the air. I couldn't hit it with a bucket. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, other than that, it is remarkably similar to the 3S in so many ways. It sounds so similar to me, like just astonishingly so, to be honest. Where it does differ is it doesn't have as much of a proximity effect, or it's certainly not as much of a nice proximity effect as the 3S. I think it's slightly more prone to bass rumble. Again, that makes sense if you looked at the frequency response for the Deity S-Mic 3S. It's kind of quite high and wobbly around the lower areas. And I do not understand why it is so damned expensive. I really don't understand. If Deity can pull off a miracle of weight and size at their price, why is the Ambient TinyMike so much more expensive? I mean, based on the rental costs, it was half to a quarter of the price of any other microphone I rented. It cost me £5 for the day to rent it. I can't let go of the fact that it looks like a firelighter, a candle lighter. I think it just looks stupid, frankly. And looking at it, I don't know if it's fragile. It looks fragile. It makes me worry about looking after it. I treat my microphones well, but I don't treat them with kid gloves. And, I like my microphones to be able to kind of stay intact. I don't touch ribbon microphones for a reason. I don't trust myself. And, the Ambient TinyMike looks really quite fragile because it is so thin for the kind of the front end of it. But that's it for my thoughts. So after today's slightly insane segue, I am returning back to somewhat normal programming. And next week's video is going to be featuring one of two things. I don't know yet which. Either I will be returning back to my normal search for my white whale of a fantastic short shotgun for voiceover, and if I do return to that next week, you're going to be amazed. I have found my white whale. If I don't return to it next week, then I'll be doing that in 2 weeks, and that'll mean that next week instead I'm doing another plugin deep dive, this time looking at, I think it's a VoxDucker, which I've just been given a copy of today. So as long as I've had the time to familiarise myself with it, I'm in the middle of creating a demo at the moment, so it's a good time to test what is basically a competitor to TrackSpacer. So I'm going to have a play around with that. If I can familiarise myself enough with it in time, then it will be the video you see from me next week. Anyway, as always, please like and subscribe, mainly because it makes me smile to see the numbers go up. Have a read of the description. You can get in touch with me via the links, book coaching, and purchase FX chains from me, as well as link up with me on Discord. As always, thank you so much for viewing. You know, I make these videos because I know some people enjoy watching them, even if it's not a huge number, and I enjoy making them. And as long as one of those continues, I will continue making them. So thank you, as always, for watching. Bye-bye.